at the moment when I sort of shifted from I'm trying to make it, right? I mean, that's kind of that's the LA phrase. I want to make it.
Yeah, right. Was this as an actor or as a director?
Filmmaker.
As a filmmaker.
As a filmmaker. Okay. Was that I had made it, actually. I had, and it wasn't that I was exactly where I wanted to be in my career or whatever, but I was doing what I wanted to do, and the making it always puts the art somewhere further away from where you are at that moment.
Right.
So it's always this sort of future thing. I'm trying to make it, as opposed to here I am and I'm actually doing something. I'm making art, so I'm making art. I don't need to make it. And the big shift, in some ways, was I was riding my motorcycle and I pulled up next to this guy driving the 750 Li BMW.
Yeah.
I'm like, who's driving this thing, right?
Yeah.
I just kind of look over, and the guy just looked miserable. He was like mid 40s, white dude, just looked so Hollywood, short cropped beard, and just looked miserable. And I made up this whole story. I made up a character for him, which is the guy who came to Hollywood like everybody does because I have a story I want to tell, a really important story. And I do whatever I need to do or can do in order to pay the bills, right? So I'm going to do a McDonald's commercial. I'm going to do a crappy horror movie. I'm going to do whatever I can so I can pay my bills. And at a certain point, one of those things kind of clicks, right? And maybe you have some fortune in that you're making something that doesn't really fill your soul, but it fills your bank account.
Yeah.
Right? And then you think, oh, this is great. I'm going, and I go out and I buy my nice car with my big payments. And then eventually I buy my house. And then I get to this point where I want to, I'm not really doing what I came to do. I've kind of sold out.
Yeah.
Right. And, well, basically that's the point where the sellout begins. That's where that starts. And this is that all of a sudden I don't actually need to keep doing this thing I don't love to do, or that's a bit of a compromise to pay my rent.
Yeah.
But I'm doing it because I need to now maintain this sort of new artificial lifestyle that I've created.
Yep. It's a bit of a trap.
It's a trap.
Yeah.
So that's what you've seen.
I've seen it quite a bit.
Yeah.
And and it was, but by sort of putting all of that thing that I saw into this one poor guy that was just having a bad day in his really nice car, was that, where was I in that process? And I'd always believed that I was doing whatever I needed to do to survive. And people have different barometer for what it means to sort of be free financially. Some people, it means I need to have $1 million in my bank account at all times. For some people, it means I need to be able to retire with $1 million. Everyone has a different barometer.
Yeah.
And the barometer moves, of course, for most of us, right? Because at first, you just want to pay your bills. Then you want to pay your bills and go on vacation. Then you want to pay your bills, go on vacation, and buy a new computer. Right. And all of a sudden, we're shifting what it means to be where we need to be comfortable, to validate ourselves as successful professionals.
Yeah.
To me, it had always been, I want to be able to graduate my kids from Waldorf High School and not be in debt. So at that point, I drive home, and unfortunately, we're talking about all this now. We're going to end up rehashing it.
Yeah, I know. This is what
But that's
we
good. Was I needed to be able to not be in debt, and I just did a spreadsheet. What are my assets? What are my debts? If I quit my job today because I feel like I'm selling out doing it, can I hit my goal of being free? And sure enough, my spreadsheet went down. If I got a terrible job, if I had to go back to tending bar or whatever it was I was doing, and sold my house and paid everything off, by the time the kids graduated high school, I'd have $0. And to me, that was financial freedom.
So connect this with the motorcycle experience, because I kind of lost
that was this whole thing of coming up and seeing, here's somebody who sort of represented Hollywood in some ways, driving a $150,000 car,
right,
and doesn't look happy. But if you're a white dude in California driving a $150,000 car, you should be really happy.
Yeah.
Right? That's great. You're at the top of the world. Right? You're in the top 1% of the 1%, basically. Right? So that's a great place to be, but he seemed unhappy. And then you go around, you see a lot of people who've actually been very successful in the entertainment arts and are very unhappy. So what makes people unhappy when you get to do what you want to do? So millions of people around the world, billions of people, would trade places with almost everybody who in Hollywood who has a nice house and nice car and gets to go to work doing what they all dreamed of doing when they were younger. So why are they unhappy? Why was I unhappy?
And?
Why was I unhappy?
Yeah. Why were you?
And why are they unhappy?
Well, let's just.
I mean, I can make up stories in my head, but what do you think?
Well, let's just talk about Matthew's. So there you are, top of your game.
Yeah.
You're in Hollywood.
Right.
You're a Hollywood filmmaker.
Yeah, I'm
Okay,
making-
just to make sure that everybody understands.
But he wasn't at the
that.
top of his game.
Well, in some way, I mean, I was
driving a
I was-
moped.
No, I'm driving a 1100cc motorcycle.
Okay.
Moped.
and I have a 6-figure income.
Okay.
Right.
So that's good.
Yeah.
And I'm making movies all the time. I'm doing stuff. I'm
Yeah.
developing projects.
Well, you're rubbing shoulders with some very famous people.
Yeah, but more importantly, I'm making movies.
Right.
And,
You're doing
I'm,
it.
and I'm making 6 figures doing it.
Yeah.
Right.
That's cool.
That's supposed to mean I
Right,
have made
right,
it, right?
right.
In theory.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
So then, but I'd had conflict with some of the people I was working with, and I'd gotten in a fight with a producer I was working with because we had a different perspective on a story. To me, racial and gender diversity is enormously important in storytelling, and genders need to be both treated fairly, as do races. In work that I participate in, and I was fighting that. We were working on a script that it was an animated script intended for children that failed the Bechdel test miserably.
No way.
Miserably. It was 2 female characters, the love interest and the mom, and the only time they talk is when they talk about the lead male character.
Oh, no way.
And I'd been fighting this, and I finally hit heads, and I got shut down, and I thought, you know what, fine, I'm just going to shut my mouth. And I'm in the middle of a divorce or beginning in a divorce. I can't afford to rock the boat too much. I've got a good job, and I can just show up and do the job I'm being asked to do.
Right.
And after a month, I was ready to quit. I was so miserable.
Right.
And it was at that point that I said, I went and I looked at my spreadsheet and said, can I quit this job? Well, I could, but I said, well, better. I'm just going to fight for what I believe in, and if I get fired, I get fired. So what? And it was just that shift in my energy. I went in the next day, I realized this was a story and a script that had actually started before I was brought into the company. I said, I'm going to let that one go. But every time I hire a writer, I start working on a project, they get literature, particularly my male writers who are just stuck in basically their own story.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Here's the literature. You got to read this before you write. And these conversations about how do we make our characters all more interesting by not putting them into these gender stereotypes. But just by shifting that in me and saying, going back to, wait, if I keep going down this road, if I continue to show up and do something I don't believe in, I've sold out because I'm just doing it so that I can maintain a lifestyle. That's not okay, right? So the shift that takes place is that because I can relax in that way, now I can actually go back to what was important to me, which is telling stories that are going to make a difference in the world.
Right.
And that ties right back into
Yes.
what you were saying.
Yeah.
And that is why when she said that way, when she phrased it that way, I said, absolutely, just making movies isn't good enough for me.
Yeah.
Right? Just telling stories is not good enough. They have to be good stories, and the world has to be at least a little bit better, or I have to believe that it is because of the story that I'm telling. Because a little boy or a little girl who's watching these animated movies it's going to break some of the other imagery that they are being bombarded with that is actually limiting their thinking. Mm-hmm. Right. So in that case, yeah, just making movies isn't good enough. Right. And I'd rather not make movies. At this point, that was kind of that moment too. I would rather not make movies. I'd rather tend bar and make people happy standing behind the bar and telling good stories and having fun with people and whatever, instead of making movies that were not benefiting the world at all.
Right.
It was a tough call to make, but it was a necessary call.